Justin Turner of the Los Angeles Dodgers has created a story that needs to be explored for a variety of reasons. Basically, he played in the 6th game of the World Series. He took himself out when they discovered that he had coronavirus. He tested positive for coronavirus. But then he went back on the field after the game. But that's not the story. That is not the story. There's a much bigger story here. And I'll just, first of all, give my opinion. This is just my opinion. I think one of two things. Either that somebody knew before the game started that Turner had tested positive, possibly even Turner, and they only took him out once the game was in hand. That's just my opinion. I think that's what happened. But before we go condemning anybody and saying this is outrageous and it's even worthy of a disqualification, they should really replay the game over because that's cheating, right? If you go on the field, if everyone has agreed to not play if they're COVID positive, and you go on the field and play knowing you were positive, or the test is purposely delayed the result until the game is in hand, which is what happened, really, right? That could be considered cheating. But there's a bigger ethical issue here. And this is where people get lost. They think, well, if that really happened, yeah, that was cheating. But I would suggest there's another issue that's even bigger. You have to really respect the athlete and their role in how you treat them, okay? I think it is totally unethical to give a player a test the day of a game, especially a playoff game, all right? And then use that and then wait and then leave them not knowing the result until the game starts or after the game has started. That's unethical. So if it were me, I would make this the rule for playoff games. You cannot test a player on the day of a playoff game. You can test them the day before and give them the result the day before, okay? But then, if they do test positive the day before a game, then you give them the option of getting tested the day of the game, the very next day, to see if, in fact, they now are negative again, so that they can play. You give them that one final you give them an opt-in on the day of the game if they tested positive for COVID the day before. Otherwise, if they tested negative for COVID the day before a playoff game, no testing the day of the game, okay? If it turns out that Justin Turner was told just before the game that he was positive, I think that's about the cruelest thing you can do to a player, especially a starter. That's not fair. Like I said, you test him the day before. If he's positive, then give him a final test the day of the game. But if he tests negative the day before, do not. And if you want to test after the game is over, okay? If you test after the game is over, then what you basically have is a situation where you test the morning the day before a game, or even maybe noon, whatever. You choose the time slot, and then you wait on a playoff day the next day, and you test them after the game, not just before the game. All right? It's not fair to the athlete to do that to them, especially if they still feel fine. Okay? And to give you an analogy, there's a speed skating champ in the United States from I think it was the 90s, early 90s, maybe it was the late 80s, Eric Heiden. They kind of, the media played him up to be like this Mark Spitz of speed skating for the United States. And he ended up having this bad luck in his when he went, and he wasn't even able to get a gold medal at first. I think all he got was a bronze. He fell a couple of times. But in the middle of all the drama and the 2 times he went to the Olympics, I think it was 2 times, his sister died. And he didn't know. He was scheduled to skate the next day, and his dad felt he had to tell him. And I think his dad was wrong. And I apologize. I mean, a father-son thing is a thing, but he didn't need to know. And my reasoning is this. If there's a heaven and if there's some kind of a connection to the afterlife, why would his sister want to see him fail because he heard she died just before he went on the ice? I'm sure she would rather, if this exists, if this existential thinking exists, she would rather he not know till after he raced, okay? Because then he can at least say he won something for his sister, rather than he lost something for his sister. So, again, how does that relate to the testing? If you test somebody the day of a game and then yank them in the middle of a game, that's not right. Why did you do that to the guy? I think you just test them the day before and you do everything based on that. If you get a positive test, you get one more chance the day of the game. And again, the result has to be known before the game starts. And if they test negative, then you let them play. If they test negative the day before a game, you do not test the day of a playoff game until after the game is over. I just think that's the ethical thing to do. Some people may say, well, yeah, but you got to look at the greater good. And no, but you got to look at the individual too. That's why this is not an easy issue, okay? You have to look at the individual and their contribution to the team. And you got to give them that slack. You got to give them that little bit of slack. If they test negative the day before, you got to give them that window to not report the result until after they play the game, the playoff game. This is a playoff game now, the next day. So, again, there may be a controversy here. We may find out down the road that somebody knew the test before the game started, and Justin Turner played anyway, and he was only taken out once the game was in hand. And then we got to ask, is that kind of cheating? You know, and my answer would be, you should have avoided the whole situation to begin with and not have any tests done the day of the game on any player who tested positive or tested negative the day before. And that would resolve this issue, I think, in a much more ethical way. And I think it's important that this issue be discussed now because we have the NFL playoffs coming up and we have NCAA football playoffs coming up, and I think the same thing should apply there. If you're going to test these players, you test them the day before, and if they come up with a positive test the day before, you give them one more chance the morning of the game to test again, and you immediately find out if they're positive or negative. And otherwise, if they test negative the day before, they are not tested until after the game the following day. I think you got to give the players, I think every player would pretty much agree to that level of, well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I don't know. I think these players are the most healthy out there on the field. They're strong, they're healthy, they're in their prime. And if you tested negative the day before, that's it. You're good to go. You know, I think every player would want that. They would want it to be that way. And I'm going to play this clip.
By now, everybody knows that Justin Turner was informed he tested positive for COVID-19 last night. During last night's game, triggering protocols, including Turner's removal from the game. He was immediately placed into isolation, but after the Dodgers won the World Series, Turner returned to the field to celebrate with his teammates and take a team photo. Major League Baseball put the blame solely on Turner. In a statement, the league said Turner's decision to leave isolation and enter the field was wrong and put everyone he came in contact with at risk. When MLB security raised the matter of being on the field with Turner, he emphatically refused to comply.
So again, this is a very important lesson. See, this is how the news can get tunnel vision into one viewpoint only. If I were writing this, I would say Major League Baseball apologizes for putting its players in a position to where they could be notified in the middle of a game or just before a game, if that was the case, that they can't play in that game. That's what the real issue is. And that needs to be corrected. And so by doing this, they'll never get to the core issue. Core issue is, don't do this to a player. Test them the day before, let them know the day before, okay? And give them the option to test again the day of the game. And if they then test negative, they can play. But if they pass the day before and they find out the day before, then they're good to go for the next game. That's got, especially for playoffs. For playoffs, that's got to be the issue. And so this to me is revision, and I'm not blaming Major League Baseball. They're speaking to the incident that happened. I'm speaking to the incident that never got exposed or hasn't yet been exposed. And people like me, you know, can't get jobs on TV because, well, first of all, there's a lot of competition. Second of all, I started really late. I never wanted to do this. I just started doing this in the last few months. But thirdly, it's just based on my own conjecture, opinion, and ideas, and it doesn't follow. Everybody's following the line that's been established. But everything I just said to you in this video, I think is cutting edge and innovative and cuts through to really coming up with a better policy. And that's what we need to be doing. And we never get there. We're always about condemning somebody over what happened rather than going back and saying, you know, yeah, that happened. Yeah, that was bad. But there's a reason why it happened. And that's on us. And we have to do a better job going forward. So I would just say, do a better job and don't put players in this position. Because, you know, if in another week it's found out that the Dodgers covered up that Justin Turner knew just before the game that he was positive, there's going to be a big hullabaloo about that. A lot of complaining, and we're gonna even say the Dodgers cheated, right? But the reality is the players were cheated. The players were cheated by not being by being tested in such a way that they could find out literally just before the game or when the game was going on. And that's not acceptable, and that's the real issue. And we won't get there if it turns out that the Dodgers covered up or Turner covered up that he was found out just before the game. That will be the story. And the big ethical issue, the underbelly underneath it, will not get exposed, which I'm trying to do with this video. So just remember that and keep me in mind, because most people won't do what I just did. And, you know, so if you ever want somebody who's just going to look at everything as a case by case, I'm never going to be totally on one side or totally on the side of the other. I look at everything case by case. And if you want to know somebody like that, I'm your guy. And I also welcome comments. So, you know, I'm not in this alone. I want to get feedback from you.